All right, so the framers of the Constitution had just designed an entire national legislature, two houses that were elected differently, full of debate, representation, the compromises, all those things. It's all different. So, if that's the case, why give one person, the president, the power to stop all of that with just a single word and a few reasons why? And Hamilton's going to step forward here in number 73 and take that on, and he says, because the legislature is the strongest branch, and the people need the president to act as a constitutional shield against the legislature. It's not to dominate, it's not to rule, it's to protect the system. To protect the system from rash and dangerous or unjust laws from the legislature. So the veto is not a weapon. It's actually a form of armor. I'm Matt Haskell. I'm a high school history and civics teacher here at a small rural Illinois school. And we're going all the way through the Federalist Papers together. And we're up to number 73 out of 85. So let's go ahead and set the stage here for Hamilton's argument. Now, the framers feared legislative overreach. That's what we're looking at. And they feared that more than any kind of executive overreach. And you have to ask yourself why. And that's because legislatures are large, they can be very confident and ambitious, they're closer to the people, and they are driven by momentary passions, especially in the House of Representatives. So in any republic, the legislature naturally becomes the most powerful branch. And Hamilton argues that unless the president has a meaningful tool to resist the legislature, then Congress will swallow the executive whole. And the veto power that the president has is supposed to prevent that. Now, his core argument, his central claim is that the veto power protects the Constitution by giving the president a way to defend both his office and the people from harmful or unconstitutional laws. And so the veto exists for two reasons. One, to stop bad legislation, and two, to discourage Congress from passing bad laws in the first place. And it's that second point, the deterrent effect, that is one of Hamilton's most important insights. Hamilton argues that the veto is essential because Congress can act way too quickly, or you can have factions that push dangerous ideas. You have interest groups that can influence legislation. You have states that may influence their own legislature or their own representatives at the legislature. Laws may be unconstitutional. Now, this is prior to judicial review at the Supreme Court, so that hasn't really been built in yet. And then finally, any kind of passion that is developed in the legislature can override principle. So the president, which stands apart from the legislative whirlwind, it can pause the process and can force the nation to kind of like reset or to think again. And so the veto kind of slows things down on purpose. Now, unlike a king's absolute veto, the president's veto is qualified. That means Congress can override a presidential veto with a 2/3 vote in both houses. And Hamilton sees this as a great balance. The president can stop bad laws, but he can't stop the people's will when it is overwhelming. So this prevents tyranny without sacrificing democratic authority. And Hamilton will go on to emphasize a real practical truth, and that is the legislature will always try to increase its own power. Not because legislators are evil, but because that's just the nature of the institution, frog and scorpion kind of stuff. So without the veto, Congress might cut the executive's authority or restrict the executive's independence, alter the president's duties, or overwhelm the president's powers, or reduce the resources for the president. And so the veto is the executive branch's shield against institutional aggression. And so it's meant to preserve separation of powers. The second point that Hamilton is going to try to make is that it's about protecting the people from the legislature. And so the president can veto laws that are unjust or rushed or harmful or unconstitutional. They can be born from faction or party, and then they can be built on temporary anger or actually designed to benefit just a select few. Hamilton sees the veto as a protection for ordinary citizens, and that's against the dangers of hasty majority rule. And so it's meant to stabilize. So why not fear the veto, right? Well, Hamilton counters any kind of anti-federalist fear that the veto gives the president too much power, because he argues that the president can't create laws or can't rewrite laws or can't permanently block laws. It can only delay. And then also Congress can override the veto. The veto is powerful, but it's not absolute. It's a constitutional checkpoint, right? So now, the second half of Federalist 73 but it takes on the idea behind preventing legislative manipulation. So it has something to do with less dramatic than the veto. It's pretty important though. It's the president's paycheck. And Hamilton argues that the president must have a stable salary that Congress cannot increase or decrease while he's in office. Why? Well, because without a fixed salary, the Congress could bribe the president with raises or punish him with pay cuts or control the president financially or manipulate the president's decisions or even starve out the executive branch. And so the president must be financially independent to act politically independent. So a president that can be bought is not a president at all. And Hamilton's point here is kind of blunt. If the president depends on Congress for money, he becomes their servant and not the servant of the people. And so a fixed salary protects, executive independence, national stability, separation of powers again, and just the public trust overall. And it ensures that the president cannot be coerced into, political obedience. Hamilton's 5 points of logic in his argument here are that the legislature is naturally the strongest branch, so therefore the executive needs protection from legislative dominance. Then the veto prevents bad laws and discourages bad legislation. The veto is limited and can be overwritten. And finally, a fixed salary prevents Congress from financially manipulating the president. There's number 73 in your 5 easy steps for your homework assignment. Now, the tone that Hamilton carries through this essay, when he writes this essay, he writes it kind of like a guardian of the Constitution. He's not defending executive supremacy. He's actually defending executive survival, because he wants the president to be strong enough to resist pressure and also to preserve balance, but not strong enough to dominate everything. It's a careful balance or equilibrium. So now Hamilton's deeper message is also moral in its dimension, because checks and balances work only when each branch can defend itself. So the veto is not an act of aggression, it's actually an act of responsibility, because it does protect minority rights and constitutional boundaries and national stability and also the people themselves. And then the fixed salary, well, that protects integrity. So together, these ideas make the executive independent enough to uphold the Constitution, even when Congress is pushing back too hard. Now, the way 73 kind of works its way into our times right now, it remains relevant in debates about things like veto power and the executive legislative conflict, but also things like appropriations and separation of powers and checks and balances, but also congressional overreach. The framers built the veto not to create presidential dominance, but to prevent legislative tyranny. And that debate still, it may not be right now, but we still see it coming up. Now, our takeaways tonight: the veto protects the nation from rash or harmful laws. A fixed salary protects the president from legislative control. And they both exist to preserve separation of powers, not disrupt. So Federalist number 73 is Hamilton's defense of the executive's ability, his executive ability to say no. Not as a monarch, not as an obstacle, but as a constitutional referee, that he's going to ensure that laws are made carefully, deliberately, and according to the rules. So the veto protects the people from their own legislature when it moves too fast and acts without restraint. And the fixed salary protects the president from being controlled by financial pressure. Together, they preserve balance, and balance preserves liberty. So if you like this one, if it helped you understand the veto power, that's great. Hang around, because tomorrow I want to get to number 74, and this is where Hamilton turns to the president's powers as commander-in-chief and the authority to grant pardons. Thanks for hanging around.